Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's session and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Larson and I'm the head of content and marketing here at the International Institute for Analytics. And I'm your host for today's session. And welcome to today's webinar, Data Strategy or Bust, Thriving in the Age of AI. In case you're new to the International Institute for Analytics or IIA, we are an independent, strategic, outcome-focused data and analytics assessment and advisory firm. We help data, analytics, and AI leaders diagnose high-risk gaps in their programs, justify investments, and execute on custom roadmaps that drive alignment, adoption, and ROI. Visit our homepage for more information about who we are and how we support D&A leaders in making the difficult and necessary transition to advanced analytics and AI. All right, so to kind of kick things off before we get started on Ryan's session, first take a moment to register for our next webinar with JC Hauer, head of AI, data science, and advanced analytics at Pella Corporation. Sorry, I'm getting lost, losing track here a little bit. Pella is an AI forward manufacturer with many recognitions and awards. They developed an agentic AI system across 14 plus manufacturing plants called the AI Maintenance Doctor as an example. IIA has had the pleasure to help guide Pella in some of their AI initiatives, and JC will be joining me on June 16th to give us an honest practitioner account of what enterprise AI adoption requires, the organizational obstacles Pella has faced and how they've overcame them, and the workforce readiness and change management decisions that's made the difference. So follow the registration link in chat to register for that webinar. It's going to be a good one. Second, we are excited to share a new 30-day enterprise analytics and AI baseline assessment that begins the journey toward advanced analytics and AI. IIA clients use the baseline to quickly and thoroughly quantify the maturity, reveal hidden failure points, and act on a tailored roadmap that is in their hands in 30 days. Today, Ryan will touch on benchmarking the maturity of your data and analytics program, and the baseline could be of help. Follow the link in chat for more details. And finally, we'd like to extend a free 30-minute follow-on consultation with Ryan Sousa for D&A leaders on this call who are new to IIA. Use the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat to schedule this free 30-minute consultation. A member of our team, Jack Taylor, will help schedule that call. If you're currently an IIA client, don't hesitate to reach out to the IIA team to facilitate a conversation with Ryan or any other expert in our network as part of your service. A recorded version of this webinar and slides will be available after the presentation. All right, so with that said, we are delighted to welcome Ryan Sousa as our featured speaker today. Ryan is a senior leader with over 30 years experience leveraging analytics and AI at scale. He's been a fixture as an IIA expert for a number of years and has helped many of our clients navigate challenges across the data and analytics spectrum. And, frankly, he's one of my favorite contributors of thought leadership to our resource library for the data and analytics community, and just an absolute pleasure to work with. As part of our webinar series last year, Ryan explored the virtuous learning cycle of data fluency for continuous enterprise growth. In our assessment and advisory work this year, we're seeing a significant uptick in AI activity, and that potential of that activity is exciting. And yet we're also seeing pretty wide gaps between that activity and enterprise readiness to scale, sustain, and capture the value of AI. And AI readiness begins with your data strategy and foundation. So I asked Ryan to come back and give us a clear-eyed view of how to turn AI ambition into compounding business value, starting with your data strategy. But his playbook really goes beyond just eating your vegetables here. There's a pioneering spirit to Ryan's data and analytics leadership that really can, I think, energize us all. We'll leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A. Don't be shy. Share your questions and comments in the chat or Q&A feature of Zoom. And I'm also going to be posing some questions to us in the chat as well. And just to kind of get some activity and get our thoughts as Ryan moves through the presentation. So let's start with this one right here. All right, if your data strategy were a movie, what genre would it be right now? Drop that answer in chat. Are we talking action thriller? Is it a comedy? Is it a documentary, a horror, or is it possibly a work in progress? So would love to hear your answers on that. Just kind of a fun way to engage a little bit and be on your toes because I'll be asking more questions throughout the session. So with that said, Ryan, I will turn it over to you. I could use a dose of data energy and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Jason. I'm so distracted now. I just want to see what people are saying. I like drama.
Documentary,
That's
drama,
always
mystery.
good.
Here we go.
Yeah. You and I talked a little bit about being like a horror, movie. Dawn of the Dead is what comes
Yes.
to mind.
Yes.
So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to cover today. And, Jason, you and Ryan, thank you for the kind words. And I'll do my best to live up to them as part of the conversation today. All right, so this just gives you a little bit of a sense of, some of the places that I've worked over the years. Probably the summary here is that, during this time, really I've been, at a senior analytics level for probably 15 plus years across these organizations. I've been able to contribute meaningfully within 5 industries in different settings, from digital native to kind of more mission driven organizations that are heavily regulated, like healthcare, and then a couple startups sort of in the middle there as well. So I've had a chance to experience a lot of different perspectives, as I've kind of grown through the years from being a programmer into a chief data analytics and AI officer. And I also, like to say that I do a lot of reading as well, because I find that reading helps me learn from others' experiences. And also too, I try to cover a large spectrum from philosophy to, what goes on in the AI world today, to try to maybe step back and think about the bigger picture, and then have the benefit of applying that to the practice of what we all do. But the common thread is, I've kind of, I really am about building data-driven organizations. And so, organizations that when I leave really continue on and continue to evolve and innovate, leveraging data analytics and AI. And that becomes more meaningful, and we'll talk about that today, especially in light of what's going on within some of the new AI technology and its capabilities, and our need to be able to engage a much larger part of the organization to really capitalize on that. But I've lived through the, like I was on the front end of the move from mainframe to the micro, to client server, to internet, to mobile, and, of course, now into some of the stuff that we're doing here within AI. Not by plan, it just happened to be the right place at the right time. And these technologies really help to transform industries. And so I think we're just seeing that again here. So I am more of abundance kind of mindset versus scarcity. I don't think the pie gets smaller as we go through these transitions. The pie gets bigger. It's just the kind of things that we do become different. And so hopefully I'll help give you some insight today, because I don't think anybody can predict what the future is going to be. But what we're going to do today is, I'll talk a little bit about what I think is going on and what the future looks like. But more importantly, how do we work in order to adapt to these uncertainties so that we're on the front end of wherever this lands in the future? So we'll talk about why strategy matters now. We'll talk about framing the journey. I think that's an important part. So regardless of where you are, whether you're just getting started or probably like most people, you're well into the journey and now it just sort of needs a refresh. We'll talk about what that looks like. We'll talk about the kind of the bookends, the business landscape and the aims and actions, and then the pieces in the middle that they shape in order to deliver business capabilities and business value. And again, I'll try not to, I'll try to keep the Einstein, quote. I'll try to make it as simple as possible but not simpler. And then Jason and I have some tools at the end that you can use to continue to do some of this exploration. So some of this already, but it is good reflecting on it a little bit in the larger scale of things. I always find it's interesting to step back and look at what's going on to really appreciate the full scale. It feels significant, but honestly, the dot-com period felt pretty significant at the time. The move to mobile felt pretty significant at the time. I'm sure, during the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, that seemed pretty significant as well. But the question is, what are some of the things that are going on, and what can we do to adapt and ride the wave of opportunity that always comes with these eras? And it is interesting. We went from statistical methods 10 years, deep learning for another 10 years. But of course, this new stuff, like in 24 months, it's amazing how quickly it's changed. And I've been really, I've stepped back a few months back to really get in and actually do some development work again, which I haven't done for years, just to experience what the opportunities are. And I feel like I'm relearning every 4 months. So it's really been the case. I think some of the significant things that we'll talk about, though, is that the opportunity now no longer rests on what our data scientists or engineers can do, but really how do we engage our business partners to do it? Because in the future world, what matters more than the technology is the domain experience. And so, how do we get people out of the middle of that so the people with the domain experience can build? And we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like. But I always like to remind people that the reason this is such a big deal now is because little by little over the years, we've been basically digitizing the consumer experience. And so, going to Uber, digitize some of that experience, Amazon, going on doing retail. You know, we not only knew what people purchased, which was state of the art at the time, but when I was at Amazon, we knew what door you walk through, which aisles you walk down, what you put on the shelf, what you took off the shelf, where you went afterwards. So we knew everything about that experience. And so all of a sudden, shopping became digitized. But that continues to happen across all these other industries. Healthcare, they're digitizing, DNA, right? So the essence of life is now becoming digitized. And that is trend is going to continue on. And so that is in a large part what is powering what we can do with AI. And so these two are convergence. And this really, when you get right down to it, is probably 80% of the work is getting the data to a point where it needs to be in order to leverage some of these tools and technologies. And so when we talk about, like Jason and I have talked a lot about this, a lot of organizations are doing a lot of interesting things, but they are going to be challenged to scale those in any meaningful way, in part because the base isn't where it needs to be. Yeah, this just recently came out from McKinsey. A lot of people aren't capturing value, and we'll say that part of the reason for that is probably they don't have an analytics strategy. A lot of times the analytics strategy is to do what the business tells us to do. So we're going to talk about how that if that's sort of the way your environment works, how that needs to change and really in order to capitalize on a lot of the new stuff that's coming. Because these days, this is no longer about data analytics and AI, right? Like this is AI touches everything in the organization. So let's talk about strategy. A different way to think about it. A lot of times people think of strategy as a plan. My approach has been for years is really think of it more as an intent and not a directive. And this has been supported by, some stuff that Harvard's done years ago that sort of set the stage. But the idea is to create a framework for decision making, but then allow the decisions to happen where the work is done. And so we'll talk more about that. And also to think of it as a verb, right? So it's not something that you plan and then you step back and then maybe you review it in 6 to 12 months, right? It is a verb. It is like we do, we learn, we adjust the strategy, we do, we learn. And so it is execution as much as anything. And I find a lot of times what we miss out on in these transitions, and I've seen this in other industries at different points in time on different technologies, is we go after the known opportunities, which obviously we should be doing that in healthcare. Ambient listening is a big deal so that physicians don't have to spend all their time taking notes during a patient visit. They can spend more time with the patient and more time at home with their families at the end of the day because those notes are being captured in real time. Or you could there's problems that we've been wanting to solve in just about every industry. Old AI technology was too expensive to do it. The new technology just makes it much, much easier. And so we're going after the known opportunities. So we're like farmers, right? We're cultivating what we know. But usually in periods like this, the big opportunities are not the things that we know about, but the things that we don't know about. And the only way to really explore that space is to engage as many people in the organization as possible in the process of innovation and trying these new technologies. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we do that in order to capitalize on these unknown and discover and capitalize on these unknown opportunities. So those are some ways to think about strategy. And so if that's how you're thinking about it, great. I think what we'll talk about now is a lot of the things that then help to support that. So this is a definition that I thought would be, useful. If you haven't read Art of Action, I highly recommend it. It really embraces this idea that strategy and execution are, two sides of the same coin. So the framework that's proven useful for me, and this has been sort of evolved and adapted over the years from going from, Amazon to, Expedia to doing startups to going to Starbucks. but really kind of coming up with an approach that sort of works across these different types of industries at different scales, from small to large. And there's the idea that at the end of the day, we're all here to deliver value, whether it's the customers, the employees, investors, or donors. There's different groups of people that participate, the people that are the consumers of the data, the producers and the activators. And in the future world, like it could be one person having all of these, playing all of these roles, especially with some of the new AI technology. But also, how do we come together and work as a community within our organization and really across organizations? And then the foundation for that we'll talk about a little bit, but business capabilities then drive the value. And then these are some of the things that we need to put in place in order to drive those business capabilities. And these evolve. Like once you get moving on this, like the first pass as you're framing, it might be 6 to 12 months before you go back and do a refresh, of your quote unquote strategy. But really, as you get going, you can revisit it every 3 to 4 months. Usually, I find 3 times a year works out great. There isn't a great word for it, like quarterly reviews or anything like that. But getting on that pulse of going back and revisiting this every 4 months is really powerful and very doable once you get going. But it does require that we embrace sort of a different approach in terms of how we work. So let's talk about discovery. I think, like every journey, success is all about how we frame it. And so rather than just diving in, it take a little bit of time to sort of kind of frame it up. And some of this is about getting the communities together. But let's talk a little bit about the framing exercise. These are the different kind of steps as we go through it, and we'll go through and talk about each of these steps. But it's really meant to be really tight. So when I come into an organization, I do this, it's like 90 days and done. And so very much time boxed. Maybe it's 100 days, but I find that if you start to push beyond that on something like this, you start to really lose interest. And frankly, at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is enough to get started, execute, and then you're going to take what you learn through execution, and then you're going to adapt the strategy. And really, the output of the discovery process is this idea of an action plan, right? And so the action plan doesn't just happen at the end, it happens along the way, as does the process of building your community, learning about your community. And I, as a leader, take a very personal involvement in the discovery process, in part because it gives me a chance to connect with people and understand what's going on, and also an opportunity to start to cultivate and bring people together around a common vision. So really coming out of the discovery phase, you should have pretty good alignment as a community around what you're going to do. Maybe not agreement, but alignment. And an area that you can get started that creates value with willing participants, and then you start to execute. So let's talk about how the framing exercise for the business landscape. I mean, obviously, this is an important part of it. I've used a tool called force field analysis that I find works really well to represent it. But you can imagine, you've done dozens of interviews, maybe you've done some workshops as well to really capture, what's going on. Hopefully you have a business strategy that you can incorporate into this. And really the output of that listen and learn phase is really, what is it we're trying to move towards, right? And so in this particular case, it's a healthcare example. They want to build an intelligent health system, which then aligns with what it is they're trying to do from a business strategy perspective, whether it be healthcare, whether it be like patient care, or it could be patient research. And then you just start to lay out then, okay, what are the things that are driving? Like what's the tailwinds that are moving us in that direction? And it's helpful to think about what those are at a high level. And then also what are the forces against change that you're dealing with? And sometimes they get pretty substantial. But this does a really nice job really getting some clarity around what it is you're trying to do that's going to create business value. And again, what you're trying to describe here is your intent. Because as you get further along with this intent, then you're going to basically spread out the community and have them start to execute in a very distributed way against this intent. And they're going to do a lot of interesting things to really capitalize on this opportunity. So again, coming back to that idea that strategy, as we're framing this, is first and foremost intent, with some ideas on maybe how you might execute against that. But at the end of the day, you're going to defer to the teams to do that. I always like to describe the current ecosystem. So this is a template that I've used, which kind of tells the story. So you can imagine, again, as you're doing your interviews, you're collecting stuff, you find tools that people are using, data that they're getting directly from the source system rather than the data platform, data they're sharing across the organization. And I find this to be a really useful tool to paint a picture of what's available within the current environment, how it's being used. And then at the end of the day, really, what does it look like? And so, you wonder why there's lack of trust in data or, there's no single version of truth. I mean, this is a really common picture of what an environment looks like across a variety of different industries. And so, you want to execute on some of this new technology. You ain't going to get there in an environment like this. Now, interestingly enough, the new technology can help you fix a lot of this. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, then you pick a destination of what you want this to all look like, and then you start to incorporate your way of working. In this example here, we've got delivery teams sort of laid out here to kind of say, we're not going to be centralized anymore. We're going to start to take a more distributed approach to how we do things so that we can scale over time. And this was a very effective technique even before, some of the new AI stuff came along. And so if you're operating in a more federated way, you're one step ahead, I think, in terms of trying to capitalize on these opportunities. It's always great at this point too to do a benchmark. So you've done your own assessment internally, but it's great to look at something like what IIA has to kind of do a benchmark from their perspective to get an objective view of it and also to look at how you stack up relative to other industries. And in my experience, they're easily the best option out there for doing that. And then after you've collected all of that, you've listened and learned, you started to build out this sort of future state of what you think you're going to do. Then you come back and do kind of this assessment. And I always find SWOTs are a very simple way to tell the story. And so I find this to be really, I do a lot of sweating, I think, when I do a SWOT because you're really trying to boil it down to the essence. And again, this is a great tool for framing the journey, right? Getting the community on the same page. And that includes your executive leadership as well as the people that are actually doing the work. And then community identity is such a big part of this. And so, as you kind of finish that up and you kind of have an idea of where you want to go and people are getting excited, hopefully at this point about the possibility, you start to work with your community about kind of building together this shared purpose of who we are and what we stand for within the organization, what we're building, getting on the same page around what we're building. And again, as much as you can, high level stuff, frame it as intent, because what you want to do then is allow the people doing the work the ability to fill it in and make it their own. How we're going to be measured, how do we decide what we're going to build and support, and we'll talk a little bit about this. I adopted this from something that I was really anti-charter, when I was at Amazon, because I'd been involved in some big chartering efforts that failed miserably. And so at Amazon, I was introduced to sort of a much lighter weight approach that did just enough to kind of frame things and get people on the same page. And so that's basically, this is an adaptation of that at the end of the day. So super lightweight, shouldn't take you very long to put this together. And ideally, if you have a core group that's helping to shape the work that you're doing here on your strategy, if you can do a workshop to drive some of this stuff as opposed to these individual or group virtual discussions, I highly encourage it. You can do in a day what would take you weeks to do otherwise, and build much more trust and alignment within the community than trying to do something virtually. It's not doing it for a while and then being able to get back and do it again. It's amazing the difference in the approaches. And I always like to establish shared beliefs. So like, you talk about values, but on their own, they sort of fit within a package, right? And so I find, it's good to build something like this. And what I'm sharing with you here are kind of places that I've landed that I find work. And so you could come up with your own, but I just wanted to give you something more tangible to work with, not made up examples, but ones that have driven, like in this particular example, what we did at Expedia, 250 people, dozens or so teams spread across the globe. How did we do that? Well, we started here. And we all agreed that, purposeful impact is what we're about. If we're not creating value, we're not relevant. We believe strongly that talent density and collective mastery, which is us working as a community, is important. Pioneering spirit is important, but also a shared purpose and shared ownership as well. And then we start to lay out, what are those values then that help to power all of that? And then it's always fun to kind of make references to people that are out there. But this becomes kind of the essence, right, of what you do. So it's probably going to be a little more practical level than maybe what you have as an enterprise mission, but it should roll up into your company mission. Nurturing talent density. So a lot of what we're going to talk about wouldn't be possible unless you had people that are high performing within the organization. So one of the things that's really common for me to do is actually reduce the size of my organization, take the budget dollars that I have, and actually pay people more to come work for me within the organization. Because a lot of times I'm trying to bring people, like in healthcare, I brought people from outside industry in order to complement the people that are already in the industry within a team. That meant hiring people from Amazon, which was very expensive trying to hire those people in to do that work. So I reduced my head count. Well, it turns out when I reduced my head count, my open positions, not only did I bring in stronger people, with fewer people, I was able to get a lot more done. And it's very counterintuitive sometimes for people, and it's certainly very counterintuitive for HR. Um, but I've found whether it's Expedia or like it's amazing at Amazon with a small team of people what you could accomplish within that environment. And that is absolutely true within startup environments as well. So it's really more about the quality and the variety of people and our ability to work as a community that really drives everything else that we're going to talk about. And then, like we talked about this a lot, mobilizing the community. So if you've got this idea that, your customer is somebody who sits in the business, that's really kind of counterproductive from this model's perspective. From this model's perspective is we're all partners working towards a common destination, and there's one customer, and that is basically the person who consumes our product as an organization. And really, the idea of thinking of people inside the company as a customer, there's a mental model there that plays out. And so therefore you become the supplier, and then it becomes sort of a transactional relationship. And that's going to really work against you as you try to get things done in leveraging these new technologies. And it is also about, I always like this quote from Marcus Aurelius, right? It really is helping people understand by helping others within the organization, they help themselves, at the end of the day. And this is not about everybody reporting to one senior leader in the organization. Matter of fact, the approach I would recommend is don't even worry about restructuring. Just get started, get to work, and start to build this out. This does not require heavy restructuring within an organization. So let's jump into the operating model and we'll kind of get through this one. Some of this will be very familiar with a lot of you. I think, first and foremost, like the thing is the way we work a lot of times gets in the way. We're very top down versus bottom up as an organization. Committees are how things get done. And so we'll talk about some different approaches for addressing that allow us to scale more effectively. And this is really interesting, right? Like if you think about the mental model of how we work, a lot of times we have an outcome that we want, we don't achieve the outcome, and then it's one of two problems. Either the plan wasn't good, so we need more data for the plan, and so we get into analysis paralysis around building the perfect plan, or how we executed against the plan wasn't right. And what we really need are better controls because those pesky people are just not executing against the plan. And so it's a plan problem or it's an action problem, which is keeping us from actually achieving our outcomes that we want to achieve. In reality, that's not really the case. I think that the battle that people are up against is uncertainty. And especially in an environment like we're in right now, there's massive uncertainty. And so, the question would be like, how are you organized in such a way to try a lot of different things to see within this uncertain environment which works out and which doesn't. And for the things that do, let's double down. And for the things that don't, okay, let's learn from it and let's move on to the next thing. And not doing it just within one part of the organization, but really how do you engage the entire organization as part of this process? And I think that's one of the big opportunities with a lot of this new AI technology is that if you have somebody out there in the business who has an affinity for technology, there's a lot they can do today with the right level of support, but they don't need, somebody who's super technical to do a lot of this stuff. Almost anything that you can dream of, you can do, within these environments. The question is, can you do it in a way that's responsible? Can you do it in a way that's scalable? And so there's still a partnership there with the technology side, but even technologists now have to have an affinity for the business. So again, if you're in a federated world where you have teams that are embedded in the business today, you're well positioned because you've already started to think and work that way. If you haven't, it's not only beneficial, it's going to be a requirement really to capitalize on a lot of the new opportunities that are out there today. And really getting into that mindset of do and adapt versus plan and implement. And so, let's think about how we operate, operating like a startup, think like an entrepreneur. I've always kind of liked that mindset. And how do we internalize that within larger organizations? And you know this, right? You probably are, have an organization that's bounced back and forth between centralized and distributed. Most larger organizations are a little bit of both. They kind of work against each other. And so the question is, how do you kind of get into a world where you make the best of both worlds? And so I'm a big fan of have your cake and eat it too. And so part of the approach for me is never how do I compromise? I just don't buy into it. Like, what are the things that get us to where we need to go? And then how do we make that happen? And then we start to work through, the things that need to be done. And usually that's one of the big challenges when I come into a new organization. They spend they're experts at all the things that can't be done. Um, but at the end of the day, the mindset that you need is more how do we make it happen? And surprisingly, a lot of the things that you didn't think were possible all of a sudden become possible. But you've got to shift that way of thinking to begin with. And so to me, that's what this picture represents, right? It's like if we were to really sit back and think about it, we can actually get the best of both worlds. We just have to think about it differently. So if you're already here and in this direction, you're well on your way to leveraging a lot of the new AI capabilities. And there's a great book out there called X Teams. I'd recommend that if you haven't seen it. And of course, Jason and I have worked on a series on accelerating your data innovation journey in healthcare, but it also really applies to any industry. Matter of fact, a lot of the concepts are from other industries that were brought into healthcare. And then I like this one here, like thinking like an entrepreneur is also like super important. Like deeply integrate business and technology. If you're doing this today, great. You're a big step in the right direction. Um, Promoting decision making where the work is done, boom, you're well on your way there. Enable team members to develop deep expertise. This is where you get a lot of the productivity. So when you think about people that are within teams that work within this environment, you've either got business people with an affinity for technology, technology people that have an affinity for the business, and they work very closely together to get things done. That will still continue to happen. However, the role that they play may be a little bit different, and we'll talk about what that might look like here in a bit. Um, Really trying to increase focus on strategic and operational priorities. So as you build out these teams should be focused on areas that are strategically important to the business or operationally important to the business. And so as you build out these different teams, that's something to think about. You engage the senior leadership at the appropriate level. So when this is working well, when the teams come talk to their senior leaders, they're never looking for permission, right? When they come to their senior leaders, they're talking about what they plan to do. The job of a leader in this model is really about providing context over direction, right? At the end of the day. And that's really different. I know for myself as a leader, there's nothing I enjoy more than when somebody comes up to me and says, I have a problem, solving the problem for them. So I really have to fight against that urge because it just feeds my ego. What I need to do is help them help themselves. And the way I do that is by providing context that they can use for making decisions. And companies like Netflix have built the company they have today around applying some of these concepts. And some of you may have heard it as like intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Pick your example, but it definitely works. And it's not only more effective, it actually is a requirement in this new world of AI. Because again, keep in mind, you can't control things, right? You can't build a committee that controls what gets done. Otherwise, you're going to limit yourself to a subset of the known problems, but you never have an opportunity to fully exploit the known problems or even begin to understand what the future opportunities are. But you do need a single data analytics and AI platform. If you don't have this, that's a big lift as well. And just some, again, more references. I always like to share these, for people if you want to dig a little bit more into some of these concepts. These are great places to go take a look. This is kind of the model that I've used over the years where you have somebody from the business who comes in as a product owner, somebody who sits in the technology as a dev owner, and this is how they collaborate to build solutions. Teams are usually no more than 6 people. We used to call them pizza teams at Amazon. If it takes more than 2 pizzas to feed the team, it's too big. But they have clear scope of responsibility and they are owners. And again, when the product and dev owner talk to the delivery sponsors, They're usually executives within the organization, and they're not there to tell them, they're not looking for permission. As these teams start to take off, they own it. It's their business to run, and the delivery sponsors are there to support it. And it doesn't mean that they don't step in if they think like the team is going to go off a cliff, but they will allow the team to try things and make mistakes and learn from that experience. And that is a powerful part of this. And so it aligns well with Agile as an approach. And if you do Scrum or something along those lines, where you've created that integration between business and technology as part of this, again, you're a huge step in the right direction to leveraging some of these new technologies. And again, they're all about like they're obsessed with delivering value within the organization, and that's what motivates and drives them to do what they do. They organize into a community, though. They can't really operate sort of independently. And so we'll talk a little bit about if you've got, like I had, probably 24 of these across the globe. How do you get everybody working in the same direction so that you end up with one data platform? And that was the goal, right? Is you at the end of the day, you want people operating independently, but you want leverage across the organization. You want a data platform that will look like it was built by one team. All of that is possible, but you're not going to solve that through process or project management or committees. Which then kind of leads into the govern, right? So in this environment, to make this work, like if you've got, you got new AI stuff coming in, the first solution isn't to build an AI governance committee or to start building projects that focus on AI or building more rules. Matter of fact, that is the last thing that you do. You always try to like Amazon, like has this idea or Bezos has this idea of two-way doors, right? And so, if you've got, or one-way doors. And so like if you're a two-way door, you can always go back if you try something, right? And for most of the things that were presented, we have two-way doors. We can try it. If it doesn't work out, we can always go back. And so the key is to try to make that as fluid as possible, right? And so try experiments. If experiments work out, start to build frameworks for implementing that, and then practices, and then tools, and then really defer things like project management, process, and committees until you just don't have a choice. You can't solve it through experimentation, through frameworks, through practices and tools. Most of the time, you can do that. Amazon, like I said, or Expedia had 250 people globally. We had no committees. We had some process because we had to be compliant with certain government agencies. We had no project management. And save the true, and not that I'm opposed to any of those things, but you don't start there. They're almost like a band-aid. What you want to try to do is solve everything through mechanizable methods as much as possible. And if you want to know how organizations like Amazon scale, for example, to do what they do, that's sort of the mindset that goes into it. So some food for thought, and that may be a little controversial for some people, but I'm happy to discuss this and dive into a little bit more detail around how anybody can operationalize this within their organization. And then, where are they evolving? As I mentioned, before, like who knows, like how this is all going to play out. But like, let's say you had this structure in place today. You had delivery teams, and you have delivery teams that say you have 6 people, and you have a mix of data analysts and data engineers. Probably the future state will be data analysts and data engineers as we know them today will change dramatically. What'll end up is you're going to have more people from the business that are on that team. And the model that was kind of interesting that I like, I don't like the words so much, but the idea is the right one, where you have they call them pirates and architects on a team. And the pirates are the people out there just trying different things, seeing whether or not it would work and whether there's value in it. And then the architects are the ones really working to make it sustainable and scalable over time. And they work very closely together on a team. And so you can imagine now, if you've got these delivery teams, instead of 12 6-person teams, you might actually have many more teams with 2 or 3 people on them focused on different activities. And I think that's a really healthy way to think about it. This isn't about how do we save cost as much as it is about how do we do more with the resources that we have. Because again, the pie is a lot bigger than what we see today. And the only way that you can find out how big that pie is for your organization is to get more people trying different things. And so I think the organizations that tend to do well in periods like this aren't the ones that reduce the work that they do in the analytics and AI space. They're the ones that appreciate that there's opportunity out there that we don't see, and they set them loose to go after it. And if anything, they invest more in those spaces. And so if you want to know like what do data-driven organizations do, that's how they think and that's how they work. But there's a great AI daily brief, if you're not aware of it, called Artificial Intelligence News. They do daily updates. It's got some great content out there. I'd highly recommend it. But they have one in particular on why agents make every job a startup. And I would encourage you to listen in on that. There's some really interesting ideas that I do think directionally make a lot of sense and will reshape how we think about the way these teams work. I'm not going to spend too much time here. I know that a lot of you are working on this. I think the big thing I would say about your data platform these days, as you get into it, um, really rethink all the tools that you have today because with products like, let's say, I do a lot of work, today with Claude Code, and I can take like it's amazing the speed. I remember I have a good friend. He took 400 reports that were sitting in SSRS, migrated them over to Power BI, and he did it in a week using Claude Code, and he did it part time. Okay. So like that in the old days would have taken months and many people to do that work. And now he's like, well, why do I even need Power BI? Why don't I just create bespoke dashboard framework, which is pretty easy to do. And the interesting thing is, as you start to explore the different tools you have, you may decide to keep some of them, but others that you can start to replace. Now, the thing that's interesting is that you have less vendor lock-in, surprisingly, because really these products, whether it's Codex or Claude Code, everything, the output of it is basically Python and SQL. And so you get your lineage that you want because that's what LLMs do a really good job of is distilling a lot of that kind of information from SQL and schemas and Python scripts. But you also can port these anywhere. So you could go from Claude Code this week to next month, maybe moving to Codex. Now, there's some things that you'll want to put in place to make sure that as you're using these tools, that you're using them responsibly. But again, those rules for how these tools work and work across these different teams, it generally is just natural language. And so even that part of moving from one tool to another to make sure that your frameworks and practices move over is pretty straightforward. All right. Just something to keep in mind as you're doing this, building for trust as well as speed is important, and especially in this new era. And this is not about having committees that review everything that you're going to do. A very novel approach that Seattle Children's did, and again, they're a healthcare organization. What they have is a questionnaire that people fill out before they actually do any of their AI work. Based on how they score on the questionnaire, it may go to a review group. And that review group is basically a data scientists and people like that who can really dig in and explore what the implications are. There'll be nurses on that team, there'll be physicians on that team. But 90% of what they do never makes it to that group. And so it just creates a lot of space for people to try different things, but in a way that's very responsible and doesn't put patients in harm's way. And so, again, going back to that mindset of how do we solve this problem before we do committees or process is always the question. And sometimes in this particular case, there is some process, and there is, you could argue, a group that's a bit of a committee, but it came at the tail end of creating automation first and then falling back on that. I'll let you take a look at this, but this is all I will say is there's an organization out there that recently has been doing a bunch of Claude development, and in the night one night before somebody went home, they asked Claude to go out to the test environment and do some optimization. And when they came back the next day, their entire production environment was gone. And there was a note actually from Claude that says, "Hey, I screwed up. I deleted your production environment." So it's kind of funny and also sad in a way. But what it did is it didn't realize the API it was using was the production environment. It went out and did a bunch of things. When it deleted the database, it also deleted the backups. And it had made some assumptions. Now, I would say, like I call it a cautionary tale. I had the same experience at Expedia. And if we had more time, I'd love to get into it, but it would curl your toes. But it was basically a human who effectively did the same thing and shut down analytics at Amazon for like four days. And we were lucky to recover it. So again, I think this is the kind of stuff that we all need to be thinking about when we start putting the access privileges in place and stuff like that to prevent things like this from happening. But these tools are no different than people. And Maverick, in some ways, they're a little bit more innovative and able to find stuff. So I'll go through aims and actions quick so we can leave some room for Q&A. But, I always I call these boulders, like what are the big picture items, how are we going to think about how we do things over the next 5 years? They call this a strategy staircase. Some of you may have seen it. I find this to really, in terms of providing context, I find this to be a really useful tool to kind of get people on the on the same page as a community, big picture, what we're doing, which then leads into what are the big rocks that we're going to do. And so in year one, like each of these big rocks is a delivery team. And so platform services is always important because it creates the data platform, tools, frameworks, and practices to support all other delivery teams. And then I focus on two areas initially at first, at most. And I give it a good like 4 to 6 months for them to really bake it in and get the standards and practices in place to support other delivery teams. And then we kind of get to a rhythm where every quarter you can probably add another 3 or 4 new delivery teams until all the people in the organization are now working in a very similar way. But it's not centralized, right? It's highly distributed. It's highly integrated and embedded in the business, yet they're all working off of the same data platform. They're building data products within that environment that can then be leveraged across other groups within that environment. And there's also really strong governance and stewardship as well around the data. And if we had more time, I'd love to spend it with you to talk about how these delivery teams do that. But I'm sure some of you are doing a lot of this today. And if you are, you're well on your way of being able to innovate with this new technology in a way that's safe and reusable and scalable. But that's pretty much what it's going to take to do that. I use operation objectives and key results as a framework for then kind of building out these quarterly or 4 month plans, and then obviously getting to work. So just a closing thought here, and then we'll open it up to questions. Again, hopefully what's come across as strategy is an execution discipline, not a planning exercise. And so it's like plan out 90 days, get started, refresh it in 6 months, get started, refresh it in another 4 months, and then get on that rhythm where, like strategy gets refreshed every 4 months, maybe even every 3 months. Though I recommend 4 months. I've done it on a quarterly basis. You like it because it lines up with quarterly business reviews, but 4 months seems to be a better cadence. Read the terrain. It's always changing. And so part of the reason why you want to get on this kind of way of thinking about strategy is that you can quickly adapt as you need to capitalize on the new opportunities. And this is happening all the time. And so community is the engine, though. Like you're not going to be able to do this in a highly distributed way unless everybody is working together as a community. So that becomes really important. But I think to that end, thinking like a startup, operate like a startup, think like an entrepreneur is a really powerful way to sort of operationalize this even within an organization. And then as you're doing this, keeping in mind that it's not just about speed, right? Which is a lot of what organizations are doing now, but also trust. Are the things that we're building, can we trust the output? Will it scale over time for us as an organization? This has to be in your mind. But now keep in mind, if the way that you do this is through, frameworks, tools, and practices, it's going to scale really well over time. If you try to do this using, a project framework, or you try to use this doing process or committees, it's going to be much more brittle and very slow to change. And then always, as you get started on this, start small and then kind of grow it over time. If you take this approach, my experience has been, 12 months to get really good traction, 18 to 24 months to see acceleration. And usually at the 24 months, it becomes much more institutionalized. So even though everyone isn't operating within this framework, there's enough momentum at that point that others just sort of get sucked in. And then the last thing that I'll throw in here as a closing is, dare greatly. This is a really rough, this is not how a lot of organization works. Things aren't going to always go well for you. It's kind of like watching a Ted Lasso. The first 2 series, the team struggled. And then something magical started to happen as you got a little bit further into it, where it all sort of came together. I would say, in my experience, having done this at least a dozen times now in really demanding environments, is really how it sort of plays out. So I'm able to stick with it, but if you haven't been through it before, it does feel pretty daunting. But anyway, Brene Brown is really big on this Dare Greatly idea. If you haven't read any of her stuff, I'd highly recommend it. She does a great job. And then if you want to learn more, as Jason mentioned, there's the Expert Network. So I'm happy to spend some time with all of you. There's also a tool out there called with Lexi.ai. If you go out there, you can request access. It's free. There's no cost to it. But this doctrine that we've talked about today has sort of been baked into her knowledge base. And if you wanted to even load up like your assessment model, you can actually work with Lexi to have conversations around how you would operationalize all the things that we've just talked about, um, as well. And so it's just another tool that you can use that's low friction to explore all the topics that we've talked about today in much more detail. And Jason, with that, I'll kind of turn it back to you.
All right, excellent. Okay, thank you so much, Ryan. Great stuff. So we got some really good questions and comments that came
Okay.
through, and yeah, so please don't hesitate, everybody. Share your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them. We have a few minutes here. So the first one is kind of going back to the talent density, that talent discussion. With that focus on fewer high talent people, do you risk burning those people out by fostering kind of that rock star culture?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean that's what a lot of people ask, right? Is because aren't you just asking fewer people to do more? And that hasn't been my experience at all. I think the challenge is you want to create freedom and responsibility within the environment. And so when I talk about high talent people, it's the people that if you were to give them that opportunity are going to do something constructive with it. And usually when people work within those environments, like they're highly energized. So for example, I worked way more hours at an Amazon than I did at a Seattle Children's. But I felt way more burned out at Seattle Children's at the end of the day, right? And so it's not just about bringing those people in and giving them the same work to do. You're changing the way that they do it, right? And so I think that's something to sort of keep in mind is that if you were to bring them into an environment that is very rule based, you will absolutely burn them out. If you bring them into an environment where there's a lot of opportunity for them to sort of do things in their own way to status the or to challenge the status quo, like they're going to thrive in this environment. And so I think that's my take on it. But I've
Okay.
never seen it burn out people. But I could see if I didn't make changes to how we did things, it would absolutely burn them out. But honest, they would never sign up to work there in the first place.
Another question came in that sort of relates a little bit here is the Amazon setup of 8 to 9 people to support the entire Amazon was the Amazon setup of 8 to 9 people to support the entire Amazon org with their data strategy or a particular business line?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was the whole organization, and it wasn't really driven by was it business line. It was like somebody had an idea. So one of the things that's really important is that it's very merit driven. So, for example, recommendations, which everybody's familiar with on Amazon.com. That was a team that came forward, put together a plan for what they wanted to build as a product. They went to Jeff. Jeff signed off on it. They got some seed funding, and then basically that team built recommendations. And imagine now you've got 20 people in your organization, maybe 30 people in your organization, all with different ideas on things that they think will create value for the organization. Each of them trying their own thing to see what will work and what won't work, right, at the end of the day. So at Amazon, there were as many teams failing at what they set out to do. Like community was a big team focused on, trying to build out the sense of community within Amazon. Didn't go very well. So they basically shut that team down, but then recommendations became like a whole new life of its own. So sometimes it's more kind of product oriented or functionally oriented. Sometimes it's maybe departments or teams or it could be you have like in healthcare, you might have a business strategy around patient flow. So you'd have a team focused on patient flow and helping to optimize patient flow. So the idea is the teams can be crafted in different ways.
Mm, okay, that makes sense. We have a really good question from Erica here that I think a lot of leaders in the line could identify with. So our client interactions data tells us we don't have a small number of big rocks to solve that transform the business. We are in a death from 1,000 cuts environment. Okay, we've heard
Hmm.
this a lot. Any advice in terms of how to apply the concepts you shared today in that scenario?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question, right? And what it comes down to is like we have this big backlog of things to do, and we just don't have enough people to do it. right? Now, as we know, it's always been a problem. It's just that the backlog has gotten a lot bigger. So one approach could be, like a non-traditional way to think about it is we can actually burn through a lot more of the backlog now with with these new tools. So we can get through a lot more of the backlog. But the problem is in an environment that's very much about abundance, you just end up continuing to grow the backlog because as you do things, you learn things, and as you learn things, the backlog grows bigger. And so a lot of people think the backlog gets smaller because the tools are more productive, but the reality, the backlog is going to get bigger, right? And so this approach, like when you start to think about the boulders, or more importantly, the big rocks. The big rocks is where executive leadership has chosen to invest. So all these little cuts, they're going to group into these different big rocks, right? So it could be some optimization effort, it could be a financial resiliency effort, who knows what those big rocks are. But all these backlog items are going to belong to these big rocks. And then surprise, surprise, you don't have enough big rocks to do everything. And so you're going to have a list of things that are going to fall out that don't belong to any of these teams. And then leadership has a choice, right? My approach has always been to go back to the executive team and say, okay, great. We've got these teams with the resources we have focusing on these things. These things over here don't have a team. What would you like to do? Right? You could either build another team and give us more funding to do that, and we can go after and do more things, or you can shut down a team and reallocate it to focus on, these set of items, or you could just not do these things right now. But the nice thing about starting to lay out these teams, and as you charter these teams, there's things that are clearly in scope and out of scope. And for those things that are out of scope, it now becomes something for leadership to address. Not a manager, not a director, not a VP within the organization, but the executives have to choose whether they want to make more investment, or whether they want to reallocate, existing teams. But that has always been my approach because then it's the monkey's off my back. It's their decision to make.
Okay. Okay, great. So we're running short on time, but I want to give just 1 minute to this question here. It's a good one. So when data strategy crosses business, technology, compliance, and operations, what's the most common accountability mistake you see organizations make as they move into execution?
So accountability mistake. I mean, it's a really good question. So it depends on what you're focused on. I don't know. The accountability mistake is having too many people, I guess, accountable at the end of the day. So like a matrixed organization, everybody has like, and this is always the challenge with a more matrixed organization. Different people have like there's some a bigger thing that you're trying to do, right? Your big rock, but then different people have different accountability for different parts of what needs to be done for the big rock. And I think that's the mistake organizations get into. You've got a lot of really smart people, who own different aspects of the solution, but who owns the solution at the end of the day, right? And this is the process problem, right? I'm never opposed to process. Sometimes it's needed. Sometimes process becomes the thing,
Mm,
right? And so, patient died, heaven forbid, right? Well, but we followed the process. I always struggle with that, like in a healthcare setting. It's like, yeah, but you're telling me somebody in the process didn't know that this process wasn't appropriate for this situation, so he had patient harm, right? But it's sort of how organizations get, and this is not a healthcare thing, right? We could pick a lot of examples in retail and finance and others where when things fail, it's a process problem. And so that's when you know that you're in trouble, right? Is when the reason something didn't happen is because of the process.
mm.
And so that's why it's important. That's why these teams, there's always two leaders that are ultimately accountable, somebody in the business, somebody in technology working together. And so if it doesn't work out, there's absolute clarity around who's responsible. Now, all of these other people may contribute and participate as part of that team, but at the end of the day, there's clarity around who has accountability.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you. So we're at time, everybody. We'll be sharing the recording of this webinar in an upcoming email, and it will also be available on our website. If you could please take just maybe 1 minute to give feedback on this session, it helps us develop timely and relevant content for the community. You should have a box that popped up on the screen right there. Stay tuned on our email and social channels for tools and resources and other content to help with your data and AI challenges. A good place to start is our Data Strategy Resource Hub, which answers questions like why do enterprises struggle with data strategy development? What key elements inform a modern demand-driven data strategy? And how do you turn data literacy into data fluency? The Hub has practitioner frameworks, exclusive roundtable peer insights, as well as key takeaways from real expert exchanges at IIA. Thank you all for your participation, questions, and comments. Thank you, Ryan. Great stuff. And onward and upward, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.
Thank you.